You are listening to audio recorded at the Village Church. For more information, go to villagechurchbaltimore.com.
My name is Desmond Jackson, and today I will be reading from the book of John, chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes, then, and seeing that the large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for the many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the signs that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going.
Thanks, Desmond. So we're looking through the book of John, and this is a series that's going to be taking us through the spring of next year as we look at one of these gospel accounts of the life of Jesus. And we're continuing today in chapter 6. And, you know, one of the themes that you're seeing through a lot of these different chapters is this idea of miracles. And if you didn't get a chance to watch it, or if you want a refresher, I would highly encourage you to go to a sermon a couple of weeks ago when Pastor Larry preached. And he gave a really good, short, brief talk about what the nature of miracles are that I think is helpful in how we understand all these things. I got a lot out of it. I would encourage you to go watch it yourself. But as we think about the nature of miracles, and we see some more that was just read here, it's helpful to recognize, obviously, these are not mere parlor tricks to amaze the crowds or even just to meet some felt needs as much as that's happening. But like an attorney, what John is doing as he's writing out this narrative of the life of Jesus is he's highlighting these different miracles to build his eyewitness case. As he's seen, he was there in the flesh. And the case that he's making is that all of these miracles, these are signs that point to the reality that this Jesus is the Messiah. He's the promised King of Israel. He has come, and then these different miraculous signs are all pointing to the fact that it's him. It's giving testimony to that. So today, in the passage we looked at in chapter 6, we see the fourth and the fifth signs that are showing us that Jesus is the Messiah as he feeds this large crowd and walks on the water. And today I'm going to actually focus more on this story about focusing on the feeding. So if you have your Bibles or in your phones or whatever you use, turn to John chapter 6 and you can just keep that open and follow that along. But we saw in verse 2 that this large crowd that's coming to follow Jesus is, the word's gotten around that he's doing some healing work, and we can assume that not everything that he and his followers have been doing in healing ministry has been recorded, because we haven't seen that much. But there's enough that it's getting around. The sick are being healed. And interestingly, this one miracle about the feeding of these thousands, this is the only one that's recorded in all four of the different gospel accounts. And they have slight nuances based on the author, but it's describing what we believe is the same miracle. And in Mark, in the parallel story in the version in Mark, it explains that after this crowd had run around the end of the lake to come to Jesus, to catch up to him, he taught them for a while. I mean, imagine masterclass, right? Taught by Jesus. They came and they were taught for the whole day. And that's why then Jesus had these concerns about feeding them, because they've been sitting there this whole day. And I think, just on a brief side thought, sometimes, depending on the frame of reference, people have this propensity to divide the spiritual between the material. And let's focus as Christians on the spiritual stuff. Forget all of that material things, the things of this world. That's ultimately not really important. It's what God is doing for eternity spiritual. And again, we are people that fully affirm that there is a great spiritual component that often gets minimized, and we don't want to do that. But at the same time, to see that God is always working in the spiritual realm, but it affects the material. So I've even sometimes heard, and again, this is a caricature, but when we talk about, say, feeding ministry, that ultimately, we don't want people to go hungry, but that's not really important. We want to meet their spiritual needs. I don't think Jesus has that dichotomy. And when we look further in chapter 6, we're going to see he's talking much deeper than just physical food. There is a spiritual component, but as we see here, Jesus also feeds them in their body. It's important, and just something to keep in mind. So even as it's as important as it is that Jesus fed these people, what we see in John's account here is there's a slightly different emphasis beyond just feeding the people. I mean, that was epic, and people were fed and they were happy, and that's a really good thing. But we see, even as Jesus asked one of his disciples, Philip, in verse 5 here, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? And what we see in the context here, Jesus was not stumped by all this going on. He's not, where all these people come from? And then, they're going to have to eat. He's not surprised or caught off guard or the miracle that's to come. It's not like he pulled it out and said, I'm Jesus, let me do that. This has all been, verse 6 shows us that Jesus knew what's going on here, and he's using this as a teachable moment for his disciples. So faced with Jesus' question, Philip's answer in verse 7 is insightful. Because I think I don't know if this is how you feel, especially maybe if some of this is new, but there can be this misunderstanding that, Jesus chose these original 12 disciples. They must have been the cream of the crop, the best of the best. I mean, this is Jesus, the very incarnation of God in the flesh. If he's going to choose his followers that are going to change the world, he must be looking for the best, the most spiritual, the most well-read, the most intelligent, the most powerful. This is an apprenticeship beyond apprenticeship. Of course he's going to choose the cream of the crop. But what we discover, and this is, again, part of the countercultural nature of Jesus, is as he's choosing his apprentices, he's not looking for the most spiritually qualified. He just chose a lot of regular people among the crowd. And Philip, honestly, I think in some of his response, he shows himself probably to be a lot like us if he were faced with similar circumstances. Because, we're talking about denarii here. One denarius was known as a day's wage for a common worker. So as it's described here, 200, it would probably come out to about 8 months of wage. But like we see here, that wouldn't be enough even for the crowd to have even a little bit of bread to eat. It's just not enough. And I love what another apostle here, Andrew, contributes in verse 9. It says, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? And the barley loaves, it's described only in the account here in John, but it's this inexpensive bread of the poorer classes. This is not like British baking show, like epic loaves of stuff. And the fish were probably these pickled side dish kind of fish that are meant to be eaten with these small cakes of barley loaves. So again, this is not, even as we talk 5 and 2, this is not like a lot of food. These are small. And I just imagine if I were there with these other disciples, I'm just watching this going on, and Jesus asked these questions. So we've all been around those meetings or rooms where sometimes people, they get uncomfortable with silence, or they got to say something. And I'm imagining, I would have been like, Andrew, seriously? You just got to hear yourself talk, because even Andrew acknowledges, what's that going to do? We got a boy here with 5 bread and 2 fish. Seriously, Andrew? Come on. Because this is almost like a bad joke. Because, we see the size of the crowd described in verse 10. And when it says 5,000, most scholars say that's probably closer to 15 or 20,000 if you take into account the women and the children that wouldn't have been included in that 5,000 number. But let's give the disciples the benefit of the doubt. Because, some of you who've done some event planning, you ever been around a crowd or even like a church meeting when the food run out? I don't want to be doing crowd control when people get hangry. It's just not a good situation to be in. And without the benefit of hindsight, knowing what's going on in the story for you and I think it'd be understandable in the place of the disciples to think that, you know what? Maybe Jesus is using this as a teaching moment, but it's more along the lines of he's trying to use all this to show his apprentices, his disciples, hey guys, this is a great lesson in knowing your limits. You need to be able to know what you're not able to do for everyone. Even though, like compassion, you want to be able to feed them, you got to be able to know when you're just not able to do what you're not able to do, and to be able to be okay with that. Or maybe this teaching point of, hey guys, you're going to have a lot more of this coming. So this is a great lesson in the importance of strategic planning for successful event coordination. Because you always want to be planning into food. You never want the food to run out. You always got to be expecting there's going to be more there than you're planning. So order 1.5 times what you might know. And these are the kind of lessons maybe Jesus is trying to live. But Jesus knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what's going on here, because the disciples, they can only see the impossibility of what they lack. But Jesus focuses on the opportunity of what they have to work with. The disciples can only see the impossibility of what they lack, but Jesus focuses on the opportunity of what they have to work with. Because the solution to their great dilemma, it's actually right there with them, even if they don't recognize it. And Jesus, he's trusting his disciples. He's trying to teach his followers to trust that God can multiply even the smallest of our gifts that are offered to him with open hands. That God will take those things offered, even if they seem small in our eyes, and multiply the impact of it. So we have the actual miracle here. The crowds of people are told to sit down, and I imagine the disciples are like, yo, where's our exit route? Because we're going to have to book real quick. This is going to get ugly real fast here. Because we got 5 bread and 2 fish. That's maybe a few people. What are we going to do when the crowd starts going hangry crazy? And then Jesus gives thanks. And I don't know what it would look like. I imagine the first time you ever seen popcorn pop, like just, what's going on here? Like the food's not stopping. It's just going out, and more bread and more fish and more bread and more fish and thousands and thousands and thousands. And the crowd gets fed fully, completely, even with leftovers. And guys, don't lose sight of the miracle that's going on here, because I think we want to view this with eyes that recognize there is something supernatural happening. Because we don't want to just reduce the lessons here to, man, look at the triumphant spirit of what's possible when everyone shares what they have. You know, if we're all just like this boy and we just share what we have, look at what's possible. And I think there's something we can pull out from there, but we don't want to lose sight of there's a miracle going on here. At least in this situation, that's not what's happening. It's not like everyone's pulling their resources, because the reality is they don't have enough. There are too many people, and they don't have the resources that they need to feed everyone. What they got is 5 bread, 2 fish. And what they have in their possession rightly feels deficient. I mean, like woefully deficient. But what the disciples are learning here is that when Jesus is the one doing the work, woefully deficient is enough. Our apparent deficiency is God's opportunity for the miraculous. Our apparent deficiency is God's opportunity for the miraculous. Because this isn't ultimately a lesson about the collective strength of this crowd here. This is all on Jesus. 5 bread, 2 fish, but with Jesus, you can feed thousands. And Jesus then, he gives some instructions after the meal on what the disciples should do. And we want to make clear here, this is more than just like cleanup protocol. This is more than just a breakdown of the event. Look at verse 12. He told his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. So you got so much food that's gone out that you got enough leftovers that these 12 disciples are going out and they got baskets and they filling up, and each one has got a basket. And imagine, if you can, if you're watching the scene, you got 12 disciples, each got their basket, walking around. And if you're getting older like me, when you got to bend down to pick something up, you start feeling that eventually in your back. And imagine that you picking up so much bread, leftovers, pieces of bread, that you're doing a lot of bending over and picking up, filling that basket. And each time your back starts to ache a little bit more and more, it just gives you pause to be thinking about what Jesus has just done. You start to be in that place where God works in us when we experience the powerful and the miraculous, and we have some time to reflect on it and to pause. And you start to maybe doubt some of those doubts that have always felt like they've led you in life, to be able to question what is possible. And you're like, did I just see what I saw? This is insane. And Jesus has called you to go clean up, and he's given you time to reflect on these things. That this was so much more than just a great exercise in how we should share our lunch. This is more than just a practice on how thousands were fed, but Jesus wanted his disciples to be able to grasp the depth of who he is and the great movement that he's invited them to be part of in joining him. And in the rest of chapter 6 that we're going to look at next week, we see that Jesus, he doesn't just want to give the crowd this physical bread, but he talks and starts to talk about the nature of the very bread of his own life, that this is a dual meaning, it's a deeper meaning. And in verse 4, we see the Passover mentioned here. And it almost feels like a throwaway line, right? But it's very purposeful, as every word in these accounts are, that Jesus is the very Passover meal himself. The sacrificial meal, the very bread of God that brings life to those who eat of the sacrifice of God. And it points forward to Jesus' sacrifice, his atoning sacrifice on the cross. And the disciples, obviously, they don't fully get all that yet. but they were following someone who's promising not just to make it better today, not to just fill your bellies, give you a nice meal, but he's the one in whom life itself is found. He's not just about us giving us something to get us through today. He is himself going to be our source of life. And they see firsthand that Jesus will meet the needs, often miraculously, but that he will also meet these needs through them. As they're picking up the bread, as they're filling those baskets, as their backs are aching a little bit, they're seeing that Jesus' work, it's going to be accomplished through his followers. I mean, it's from them that he received this initial small offering of bread and fish. They knew this little boy. In other gospel accounts, it's actually described more specifically that he told them to distribute the food among the crowds. The disciples, they're literally Jesus' outstretched hands to miraculously feed the crowd. Jesus did the work, but he exercises it through his followers. And, you know, when we talk about the nature of miracles, and I know even in these times of just sometimes almost seeming like a conflict between science and faith, and that the two can't exist. And if you truly believe and trust that God works, you won't put your faith in things like science and what humans can do and what we can accomplish. And those are two diametrically opposite ideas. And I don't know if that's necessarily the way we've got to think about how God works. And some of you know our family has been going through some medical stuff this year, both with my brother and even in our own family, our daughter with just this walking through cancer, through leukemia. And I mean, without being morbid, I'm realizing I'm astounded by some of the technology that's allowed to happen with stem cell donations and with cancer treatments, with medicines and different therapies. And the reality, you know, sometimes if I want to complain, I've got to kind of stop myself and just pause and sit in the bigger picture and realize in previous generations, not that long ago, the forecast for life would have been very dark and dreary in our family. That's just the reality of it. And it astounds me at some of the technological advances in medicine and treatments that have occurred. And I mean, I'm just amazed at the capacity of what people made in the image of God. And they might not even use that language. They might have nothing to do with who God is. But every single person is made in the image of God. And what we believe in, a sense of common grace, every person who's got this incredible ability to develop advances, that's from God. God is a creator God. He's incredibly brilliant, and he's infused in his image bearers the ability to be brilliant and creative and think about how we can improve life. That's from God. And I'm amazed what people are able to accomplish. And just, as we think about that in a more faith-based aspect, what I would encourage you, I think about our church, and I think about some of the people, and, we're not sitting in the same room, but I'm picturing in my mind. I mean, I'm astounded sometimes that I think about some of the people connected with our church and others, and the astounding ability to make things happen in the world. Like, be at the top of your fields in whatever discipline you might have chosen, to be captains of industry, academia, just even physically, making money, resource-wise. Like, the opportunities are really, there's no ceiling there. And it's good to recognize how God works through us. And again, we sometimes have this, I think, unhelpful propensity to divide the spiritual and then the rest of life. And what happens is when I come to church and maybe I worship or I do group or I do some service projects, that's like the spiritual stuff. And then I do my whole rest of my life. And that's like when I spend most of the bulk of my time, where I don't think God creates all of those distinctions. Yes, there are some things that are very much related to church, but God is not beholden to just working within the walls of the church. He's working through all of who we are. And could I welcome you to, in a posture of humility, look at some of the ways that God has endowed you with abilities that are maybe unique to you. Some of you are so gifted, so talented. You have so many abilities, so many of opportunities. And we live in a world now where it's not even apologetic about, build your platform. Go get it. Do everything you can. Go kill it. Make your name. And maybe what I could encourage you in a culture, in a world that encourages us to build our platform, could I say, go build that platform. Go get it. Do whatever you can. But may Jesus not be a means to build your platform ultimately, but your platform may be a means to exalt Jesus. That be excellent. And sometimes I think we got this weird thing in the church where we say, minimize who you are, and I get it. We don't want to be proud, arrogant people and exalt ourselves and build like our own towers to the sky. We're not saying that, but I'm saying, do your best with what God has given you. Some of you are so artistic. Some of you are so brilliant. Some of you have the ability. Some of you have this deeply embedded compassion that you look at the world, you look at the hurting, and you're not just going to sit it and just feel bad about it. You're like, what can I do about this? And go do it. But as you do it, may it be a means for you to exalt the name of Christ, to point to Him, to be able to say, look at what He's endowed me with, and it's all Him. This is all about Him. And think about the things that we can offer to God. But I do want to also, along with that, sometimes if we're not careful, we just think that God wants to find those extraordinary things in our life, our gifts, our skills, maybe the things that we are really good at. And that's the stuff God will use, and I think He does use it. But it's not just the extraordinary things we have to bring. But I think even as we see here, sometimes it's those pitiful looking little pieces of bread and pickled fish. The things that even the followers of Jesus will look at and say, what are we going to do with this? It's the broken things of our lives. It's the things that maybe we've tried to hide in dark corners of our life to move beyond. Maybe the things that look like those pitifully meager pieces of bread and fish that possibly even we look at and we say, this is a wasteful area of my life. There is no good in this. And I guess what I want to invite you into is to see with spiritual eyes that the things that the world often considers meager, pitiful, unusable is exactly what in the hands of God He will say, I'm going to multiply this and do crazy, wonderful things through it. Don't diminish what God will do through lives fully surrendered to Him. The God who will take even the small gifts that we offer and multiply its impact to transform the world. So yes, take some of those extraordinary things that maybe you feel God's blessed you with, that you have the ability to do, fully give that to God. That we would pray God would use that to impact the world. Maybe you will create vaccines. You will do amazing work. You will create humanitarian efforts and our humble prayers. God, use all of this. But guys, God will also use the broken things, the broken relationships. Maybe for some of you who are champions and survivors of abuse, that's not just something for you to have to gotten through, but God's also going to use that to work in other people's lives. And I can say that because I've seen that over and over in our church. I would love to say it's like our amazing programs or like just epic sermons that like have killed from the stage. And God uses all of those things. But you know what's oftentimes been used to bring about a miraculous change and transformation in a person's life? Someone who's so broken, so crumbled, who said, there's no hope for me at all, but they encounter another person who's gone through some real bad stuff in life, some tough journeys in life, but they see victory and they see hope. And some of our most effective, powerful instruments of miraculous change have been those people who just have a broken journey, but they're seeing the healing hands of God all over that, and they share it with someone else. And if I could encourage you, there is no broken, wasted part of our lives, but God uses it all when we offer to Him and say, Lord, even this is yours. So as we close now, can I just invite you wherever you're at, worshiping, can you just, and you can physically do this if you feel comfortable, or you can do it in your mind's eye, but picture yourself holding out your hands, and picture in those hands, as you're standing there, picture those pieces of bread, those fish, meager, small. And as you picture those, can I invite you right now to see the things of your life that God might be inviting you right now to offer to Him? And maybe you've always seen them as deficiencies in your life. Brokenness, hurt, trials. But to be able to recognize that God is saying, offer those to me and see what I will do with the miraculous power that I have to multiply its impact, to bring good news to a hurting world that needs healing. So can you, as you imagine that in your hands, offer that to the Lord right now? And be reminded, yes, God uses extraordinary things we have to bring, but we are a world and a culture that's a little too enamored with the spectacular. God often uses the things that look very small and unnoticed to bring about miraculous transformation. So take a moment right now as you picture those things in your hands. Say, Lord, this is yours. This is yours. Sit in the stillness of that for a moment, and I'll pray for us.